Hey everyone, Liam here, and welcome to episode 5 of the Kickin podcast. I'm very excited to be back with you guys. Obviously, trying to get these podcasts to be a lot more consistent going forward for you guys. Every 2 weeks on a Saturday, you should expect them on the channel on any other platforms that you listen to the podcast. And I'm very excited to be back. The last time we did it, obviously, a lot has changed since then. We've had some big news, some also, I guess, some underwhelming performances from players on court, some improvements from other players on court, and a few other headlines to look forward to, or potentially debate whether we should look forward to them. And you know what? It's going to be a very intense podcast of the amount of news flow that there's been going on in the world of tennis over the last month. And I mean, I think everyone knows what's happening right now in the Sinner case. I think if you're a tennis fan and you don't know what's happening in the Sinner case, where have you been? It's been quite clear that, of course, he's got a 3-month ban. He'll be eligible to return to play just in time for the Rome Masters to get himself into his game, and then he will go on to play Roland Garros. It's been an interesting case because I find there's been quite a bit of backlash against him, quite intense backlash against him by both players, but also, members of the media and stuff like that. And, I think it's something that we have to be a little bit wary about how we deal with it, because of course, you have to take some level of responsibility for the way that, the contaminant got into his system. But obviously I think everyone knows, or most people think that, of course, it didn't enhance his performance. He didn't do it on purpose, and it was an accident. He obviously got rid of 2 members of his team and, hoped that that would be enough going forward. But of course, it seems obviously that the system wanted to make a little bit more of an example of him. And it seemed going into April that, it was going to be this court case, it was awaited, and it was going to be, extremely very tough situation where potentially he could be facing a 1 or 2 year ban. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you get a 3-month suspension before your court case is even due. And so, that information that came out in the media was just very minimal information. The information comes out, oh, he's banned for 3 months, and people asking why, what, when, how. It's been quite mishandled in that sense. Once the fact started to come out that, of course, WADA had approached Sinner instead of the other way around, and that Sinner was actually sort of a bit more wary of agreeing to anything with WADA, preferring to go to a court case, but in the end, obviously, choosing to accept a 3-month ban, you can sort of see, where this makes a lot more sense. I think 3 months is a fair ban. Then I guess there had to be something that needed to happen. Obviously, otherwise the system is, there's a complete issue in the system if you get these things happening with no consequences. But the system still needs some sort of an override. I find that it's very unclear what happens behind the scenes. It's not transparent. You see some players who, for taking too much of an IV, going over the dosage of an IV, which realistically you could, I don't know the medical term, but I wouldn't consider it doping, get banned for a year. I think it's Max Purcell who's been banned for a year because of that. And then you get a player like Sinner who gets 3 months and realistically can train throughout those 3 months at the Monte Carlo Country Club, and then be just back in time for Roland Garros. And obviously had the period all last year where he managed to sort of play throughout the entire year, win 2 slams, the US Open last year and the Australian Open this year, and then take the ban when obviously there's a little bit less intensity and importance of the tournaments that you could say are in this period. So it's definitely an interesting debate. I'm of the opinion that, I can't blame Sinner for accepting the 3-month ban. I don't think we should be blaming him for that. I think we should be blaming the system for allowing this to happen. I think there needs to be the same rules for everyone. You can't have players who have preferential treatment or access to, better terms and conditions to their bans or their suspensions compared to others for similar circumstances or even potentially less severe circumstances. In this case, I don't think we can blame Sinner for what's happened. I think we can blame the system, but I think we can also take it as a positive aspect because it sort of shone a light on the system that we have in sort of the ITIA and WADA and how things go on there. Obviously, the ITIA, the International Tennis Integrity Agency, they've done great work. I just think that WADA and their communication needs to be a little bit better going forward because, if they're supposed to be partners, how can we have a situation where he gets provisionally suspended, then gets unsuspended and is completely fine, then WADA changes their mind, and then they get a suspension such a ban a year later. The agencies need to work together and they need to make sure that the transparency is there, but also the framework for how to deal with these things, both as an agency and as a player, is there to ensure in the future we don't have as many issues. I think over the last year, we've seen at least 4 or 5 cases of issues in testing for players. We've had Swiatek, we've had Yannick Sinner, we've had Max Purcell, you've had Jensen Brooksby before, stuff like that. So realistically, I think we need to have a consistent approach going forward. This, however, this ban has brought up a very interesting situation where, of course, Sinner is the world number 1 still, and I mean he's got a massive gap to remaining world number 1 until he comes back as well. I don't think there's no issues at all for him staying number 1 because when he comes back, he still has a big buffer of points, and even after Roland Garros, even after Wimbledon, you would see him in that world number 1 spot. But it is an opportunity for players such as Carlos Alcaraz and Alexander Zverev to realistically gain a lot of points under their belt. Has that happened? Not really. Alcaraz did, of course, get those 500 points in Rotterdam. It was a very, very impressive tournament from him. You could tell that he was building up his game throughout the week, and obviously being his first indoor title, and him trying to fight the conditions against, or the lack of conditions, you could say, against players who are very good in indoor conditions, such as Hubert Hurkacz, wasn't an easy thing for him, but it was a very impressive feat. Obviously, 500 points isn't really going to go too far for him in Doha. Obviously, it wasn't the result he wanted, losing to Lehechka, especially when he was leading in that third set. You could say he's not made the most of his time, but also I think he's focused a little bit more on the bigger tournaments sometimes than he would be on the 500s. He has played 2 500s. He's won one, didn't win the other one. It's not the end of the world. Someone who has been a lot more interested in trying to get as many matches under their belt over this period, ever since the Sinner ban as well. Obviously, you can't say that the Sinner ban was the reason he's trying to get these matches under his belt, but he's just signed up to all of these tournaments before, was Alexander Zverev. And he's not had a good clay season or start of the hard season in terms of him playing in Acapulco. Obviously, in Buenos Aires, he lost. In Rio de Janeiro, he lost. And now in Acapulco, he lost. It's tough because Zverev, obviously making the final of the Australian Open, you expect big things from him going forward. Could you say, losing in a 250, then losing in, 2 500s is the end of the world? No, not really, because maybe he doesn't put as much pressure on himself or as much expectation on himself in terms of the importance of him winning those tournaments, but also winning those tournaments when you are the best player on the field and you are sort of the example what people should be aspiring to in terms of the level of opposition. You would expect at least one title from those 3 tournaments, especially because you're the top seed. You're basically the top seed in all of them. There's not really anyone, other than Sinner. If he was playing, he would be the top seed, but he's not. You're the top seed there. Alcaraz wasn't even playing those tournaments. Djokovic neither. So you might as well, try and get some points under your belt, especially because you are number 2 in the race right now, and you do have a good chance of, by the year end, being world number 1 if you get a very good amount of points under your belt before we get there. Is it going to be that easy going forward? Now there's Indian Wells and Miami that we're looking forward to. Alcaraz, if we look at it from an Alcaraz perspective, it doesn't really change too much from him. He did win Indian Wells last year, so he's actually defending 1,000 points just at the start of March. Then obviously Miami, he's had some good performances there over the last couple of years. Obviously not winning the title over the last couple of years, but you know, I don't think there's much for him to gain in terms of world number one ranking points there, because he's already got a lot of points to defend over the next month. Alexander Zverev, on the other hand, can make a very big leap, but realistically, he's not shown me the tennis that he showed in Australia here in these last three tournaments. So going into Indian Wells and Miami, I really hope he finds his form, because it'd be great for him to really get as many points under his belt to make the world number one race a little bit more exciting. That would be my opinion. That would be my thought. Speaking of, obviously, people taking opportunities when they have them, we can't look past I would say a player who's definitely taken the tennis world by storm this year. Obviously, I think everyone knows who I'm referring to in Joao Fonseca. I mean, phenomenal, obviously, start to the year, qualifying for the Australian Open, beating Andrei Rublev, obviously eventually losing to Lorenzo Sonego, but showing still how much heart and grit he has in him and how much potential he has in him. He went into Buenos Aires, basically changing the tournament from an Argentinian tournament to a Brazilian tournament. That's how much crowd support he had from the Brazilian crowd there, but also the Argentinian crowd was there to support him as well. So it's definitely an impressive thing. I think he's just in the top 80 in the world now, and my bold prediction, I think, was top 30 by the end of the year, top 20 perhaps. I'm sticking to the top 30. I really want to see how he does in Indian Wells and going forward in the year, because he's really a player who I think just excites you. You've had a period in tennis where you've had the most exciting players retiring left, right, and center. We've had Dominic Thiem retiring, Diego Schwartzman, Nadal, Federer. We've still got Djokovic, but we are able to get some new players in who are able to excite us as much. The Alcarazes, the Sinners of the world, and now the Joao Fonsecas of the world. I think Fonseca going forward will definitely be one of those players who will be leading the way for everyone. And I'm excited to see what he comes up with. Hopefully he gets himself to a point by the end of this year where maybe he is seeded at a slam, at the US Open, if he plays that well. So I'm very excited. It's going to be quite interesting, because obviously with Indian Wells and Miami coming up, and then going back into the clay court season, where it's a clean slate for him. Realistically, it's a clean slate, because he's got as many opportunities as he wants to get as many points as he wants under his belt. There's nothing really stopping him. So I'm excited to see how far he can get this year, to set up a base for him, really, and sort of understand where his level is at. Speaking of other players to sort of, I've had sort of my own opinions of management, of coaching team, of game style, of motivation for this player, and they seem to be doing some motivating or some positive motivating aspects in their game recently. And I'm talking about Stefanos Tsitsipas here. Tsitsipas, of course, hasn't really played as well as he should have or could have over the last two and a half, 3 years. You could say it's been quite interesting to see, obviously, his struggles, I would say, in terms of the amount of effort he's put onto court, or shown to be putting onto court, or the motivation he shows when you just see him play. But he's playing currently in Dubai, and he's in the semifinals, and he seems to be as motivated as ever. I'm very happy about this. Obviously, there's the big aspect, which not most people, I think most people have seen this by now. He is playing with a Wilson coded racket in terms of having the stencil on the strings and it being painted black, but it's definitely a Babolat racket. It looks like a Babolat Aero, and it seems to be giving him a little bit more pop on his backhand, and it's good to see, because it's something that he himself has struggled with quite a bit. He's not been able to find that consistency or that depth or that confidence in that backhand, which has allowed other players to know that, and know that, if I hit to that side long enough and hard enough, I'll wear him down. I'll win more points than I lose. Here in Dubai, he seems to be doing quite well in that sense. And obviously, beating the likes of Berrettini isn't an easy feat, especially after Berrettini beat Djokovic in Doha just a week ago. So realistically, I'm happy with the way Tsitsipas is progressing or showing initial steps towards some positive progressions. I hope this means that we will see a little bit more competition towards the top of men's tennis, because at the moment we've got players who can sort of play good a week here, few weeks off, and then a week there, but we've only got less than a handful of players who every single week are playing consistently, getting deep into tournaments, and one of them is banned. So, I mean, if we can get Tsitsipas back to those levels of 2019, 2020, 2021, it'd be great for the world of tennis, because he's got a huge serve, massive forehand. It's realistically the backhand and the mentality and the motivation that needs to be worked on. But it seems like he's taking the necessary steps to do so. And speaking of other players who have taken some necessary steps in terms of improving their game and their mentality, we can switch over to how Andrei Rublev has been performing. Obviously, winning Doha in a stacked Doha field. Obviously Djokovic and Alcaraz, they got beaten earlier on, so he didn't have to face them. But nonetheless, he still won the tournament, and it's very impressive to say that he's been slowly but surely reducing his ranking, going towards the end of the top 10 list, getting close to going out of the top 10. But the week in Doha and the composure he showed on court, especially, having those 8 match points against Alex de Minaur and managing to win it after, losing 7 of those 8 match points and having to save a match point himself, was very impressive. I think his mentality has improved. He has talked very openly about the struggles he's had with his mental health and his sort of purpose in life, and his sort of motivation of what am I doing this for? What's really driving me forward? He's been quite open about that, and I think it's very important, because tennis is a very lonely sport. So being able to discuss these things openly is important, because it shows other players or other people, even fans, that you're not alone in these sense of things. And he's been able to sort of calm his mentality down, because he's always been quite erratic on court, quite aggressive with himself, angry with himself. But he's sort of reduced that, it seems like, in Doha, and I hope it continues throughout the rest of the year, because I think once he is calm, cool, calm, and collected, and focused on just step by step, he's really tough to beat. And obviously, we've seen him beat the best players in the world at his best. So not someone you really want to be facing if he's in that zone. And he's definitely top 6, top 5 level on his best day. And I'm very excited to see what he brings to Indian Wells and Miami. Obviously, he's had some success in Indian Wells before, reaching the later stages of the tournaments a few years ago, but he hasn't won. Last year he won the Madrid Masters, but realistically, I wouldn't say that was the toughest tournament he's ever had to win. It'd be great to see him win a Masters 1000 or another 500 tournaments with a stacked field to just sort of back up what he's done so far this year. Speaking of the Masters tournaments, obviously we've got the Sunshine Double coming up in a few weeks' time, and I'm very excited about that. We'll be dissecting the results there in a few weeks' time in the next pod. But before that, obviously, there has been talk of a potential 10th Masters 1000 on the tour. I mean, we have 9 at the moment, so I think everyone knows, and they're sort of well spread out throughout the year. But you could say there is a period of time in the world of tennis where the intensity of fans watching perhaps isn't as much, or the interest of fans watching isn't as much, or the players as well. You don't see all the top players playing all the time in the period between post-Australian Open, pre-Sunshine Double. You'll get players, like we saw with Zverev, Alcaraz, and Djokovic, and Medvedev playing these 500s here and there. But you don't always get that every year. You do get some players who take a little bit of an extended period break, or sort of pick and choose 1 or 2 tournaments. But realistically, in terms of ranking points, it doesn't make up the biggest part of a player's season going forward. When you look at the year end of a player and their rankings, you rarely see a big chunk of points in that period between the end of the Australian Open and the start of the Sunshine Double to really support their ranking as much as potentially they would like to. So there has been talks that there's going to be a 10th Masters 1000 event starting either in 2027 or 2028 in the month of February. So it's going to be quite interesting to see, because obviously we know that obviously this tournament, adding any tournament to the schedule is going to mess up every other tournament that currently exists. If you add a Masters 1000 into February, you're going to have a tough time selling players to come to, selling the idea to players, oh, come to play in Rotterdam, come to play in Acapulco, come to play in Buenos Aires, come to play in Rio, it's going to be tougher to sell it to, especially to those top players, or even the lower ranked players who decide, you know what, I can get more prize money by losing in the second round of a Masters 1000 than I would if I get to the semis of a 250 or the final of a 250. Just for an example, and especially for this tournament, it's going to be in Saudi Arabia, it just makes a lot more sense that players will be fluctuating to be playing, Doha, Dubai, and this Masters 1000. So tennis and peer and all of these Saudi Arabian investments into the world of tennis are definitely paying dividends at the moment. I'm not shocked it's happened or it's going to happen. Am I shocked it's happened as fast as this? Potentially. I was envisaging more 2029 2030, but it seems it's going to be happening as soon as in less than 2 years time. I think it's going to be quite interesting. I think it's going to be quite intriguing to see how it affects all these other tournaments and how these other tournaments react to it. Obviously, it's not official. It's sort of rumors. It's that, I wouldn't be shocked if it is, 80% official, 20% rumors. So it's going to, I want to realistically understand how it's going to affect all these other tournaments, because we have a fair, you've got the Golden Swing in South America. You've got the Indo-European hard court tournaments, Marseille, Rotterdam, etc., etc. So what are players going to be doing? Are they going to be mainly focused on playing this Masters 1000? Does that mean then they just decide, I'm going to spend my time in the Middle East after the Australian Open to just really get myself into the rhythm and find my range and not have to travel back and forth to these tournaments? I've already got 500 tournaments there in the Middle East. I've got 1,000 there. That's 2,000 points worth of tournaments that I've got there. I might as well stay there before I go back to the States for the Sunshine Double. Definitely interesting. It could definitely reduce the level of quality of players at those other tournaments. So I'm interested to see if we have any sort of back and forth or sort of pressure from these other events to try and push this out of the way. But then it's like, when do you put a 10th Masters 1000 tournament on the calendar? Can you put it post the Sunshine Double? I don't think so, because then you're getting into the clay court season and people are focused on staying in Europe, getting themselves ready for the free Masters 1000s and then Roland Garros. Can you put it during the grass court season? It would be nice for the grass court season to be a little bit longer, but already there's not that many weeks beforehand, and you've got 2 500s before Wimbledon, and then is Wimbledon willing to push themselves a little bit backwards to maybe have a Masters 1000 before them? But how many players are going to really jeopardize their opportunities at Wimbledon by playing a Masters 1000 the week before? There's a lot of debate, and then you could say, well, you could put it during the US hardcourt swing, and players can decide whether they want to play a Masters 1000 in Cincinnati, Toronto, Montreal, or in Saudi Arabia. But realistically, having to play these Masters 1000 as a mandatory event, it's going to be very tough for players if they have to travel from one side of the world to the other. Usually they like to stay in a sort of specific period for a specific amount of time to make sure that there's less travel as possible and as much tennis time and as much playing time as possible. So it's going to be quite interesting. Realistically, I think the February time makes sense. Whether it makes sense for the other tournaments, outside of the Middle East regions, it will be revealed, I guess, in due course. But yeah, that's going to be quite a fun. I'd be happy with it, but to be honest, if you were telling me what tournament would you want to add onto the tour at this moment in time, I would say it's a Masters 1000 on grass. I think the grass court season could be a little bit longer. We sort of neglect it a little bit. You know, when Wimbledon's around, everybody loves the grass court season. It's great, blah blah blah. But realistically, once Wimbledon's over, people forget about grass quite quickly. If you have an extended grass court season where you can have more players on court practicing and getting their game ready for Wimbledon by spending more time at these 500s, these 250s, and a potential 1000, I think it would just bring a lot more versatility into people's games on grass, but also just provide us a lot more competition and a lot more optionality in terms of who could beat who could, go far at Wimbledon and stuff like that. So yeah, I would prefer that, to be honest, but it's going to be an interesting news piece to be following over the next, year or so. And with that, that's basically all I had on my agenda for the podcast. But I appreciate, it's been a long time since I last did a podcast, and going forward, as I said, it's going to be every 2 weeks. So next time we'll be discussing, Indian Wells and Miami, the results there. And obviously, if you have any comments or sort of opinions or questions, just leave them down in the comments below, or on any podcast platform that you're listening this onto. And with that, thank you all for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. And thank you for joining us here on Kicking It.